Imagine you are a supreme commander of a hostile global coalition. You have the ships, you have the planes, and you have millions of soldiers ready to die for your cause. Your target is the ultimate prize, the United States of America. You've looked at the maps, you've studied the satellite imagery, and you've read the history books. You think you've found a weakness. You think that if you can just land enough boots on the ground, the great American experiment will crumble under the weight of your superior numbers. But as you begin the planning phase of Operation American Fall, you start to realize that you aren't just fighting a military. You aren't just fighting a government or a budget. You are fighting against the very physics of the planet. You are fighting against a geography that was designed by nature to be an impregnable fortress. Most people think the U.S. is impossible to invade because of the 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, the F-22 Raptors, and the trillion-dollar defense budget that is larger than the next 10 countries combined. And yes, the military is a formidable wall. But even if you could wave a magic wand and make the entire U.S. military disappear, if every tank, every jet, and every soldier vanished into thin air tomorrow, the United States would still be the most difficult place on Earth to conquer. In this deep-dive documentary, we are moving beyond the hardware. We are looking at the invisible fortifications that make the U.S. an island continent that no foreign power could ever hope to hold. From the two greatest moats on Earth to the 400 million rifles hiding behind every blade of grass and the logistical black hole that would swallow any invading army whole, welcome to the reality of the American fortress. Here is why invading the United States is mathematically, geographically, and logistically impossible. The first and most obvious reason why you will fail is the two great moats. Every successful invasion in human history has relied on one thing: proximity. To invade a country, you need to be able to move supplies, fuel, food, and ammunition from your home base to the front lines. Russia could invade Ukraine because they share a land border. The Allies could invade Normandy because it was just across the English Channel. But the United States? It is an island, a massive continent-sized island protected by the two largest oceans in the world. Imagine you are launching your fleet from Asia or Europe. To reach the U.S. West Coast, you have to cross 5,000 miles of open Pacific Ocean. To reach the East Coast, it's 3,000 miles of Atlantic. This isn't just a long boat ride, it's a logistical death sentence. An invading army of, say, 1 million soldiers requires thousands of tons of supplies every single day. Every bullet, every gallon of diesel, and every loaf of bread has to travel across thousands of miles of ocean that is constantly patrolled by the world's most advanced submarine fleet. Even if you have the world's largest transport fleet, you face the tyranny of distance. By the time your ships reach the coast, they are sitting ducks. In modern warfare, you cannot hide a fleet. Satellites can see a bathtub from orbit. Your fleet would be tracked from the moment it left port. Long-range anti-ship missiles, launched from the U.S. coast or from deep within the interior, would start picking off your transports while they were still 1,000 miles away. You wouldn't be arriving at a beachhead, you'd be arriving at a graveyard of twisted metal. And then there is the landing. An amphibious assault is the most difficult maneuver in military science. To land on a hostile shore, you need a 5-to-1 superiority in numbers. But how do you maintain a 5-to-1 superiority when your supply line is 5,000 miles long and your opponent is standing on their own front porch? You would need a naval force larger than every ship currently in existence just to keep the first wave alive for 48 hours. The Atlantic and Pacific aren't just oceans, they are energy sinks. They drain the strength of any invader long before they even see the Statue of Liberty. Let's assume the impossible happens. Your coalition manages to land a significant force on the beaches of California or the marshes of Virginia. You've established a beachhead. You think the hard part is over. You are wrong. The hard part hasn't even begun. Welcome to the geography of a nightmare. The United States is not a flat plain that you can just drive across. It is a series of geographic layers designed to grind an invading army into the dirt. On the East Coast, you hit the Appalachians. These aren't just mountains, they are a maze of dense forests, steep ridges, and narrow valleys. It is prime territory for an insurgency. Every hill is a sniper nest. Every valley is an ambush. On the West Coast, it's even worse. You face the Sierra Nevada and the Rocky Mountains, massive, jagged walls of rock that reach over 14,000 feet. There are only a handful of passes through these mountains, and they can be easily blocked or destroyed. Your tanks would be stuck in traffic jams that would stretch for miles, while your soldiers froze in the high-altitude air. Even if you get past the mountains, you enter the Great Central Void. The American Midwest is vast. It is thousands of miles of open space. To an invader, this looks like an easy road. To a logistician, it is a black hole. An army moves on its stomach, but it lives on its fuel. To move from the coast to the interior, you have to secure thousands of miles of roads and rail lines. Every bridge, every tunnel, and every overpass is a vulnerability. The U.S. has the most extensive interstate highway system and rail network in the world, but in an invasion, that system would be sabotaged. You would be trying to move a modern army across a continent that has been turned into a wasteland of broken concrete and twisted rails. And let's not forget the weather. From the tornado alley of the plains to the Death Valley deserts and the polar vortex winters of the north, the American climate is just as hostile as its terrain. You aren't just fighting Americans, you are fighting the Rockies, the Mississippi River, and the Great American Desert, and nature always wins.
Assume you've cleared the beaches. Assume your supply lines are somehow holding. Now you face the most terrifying factor of all, the American people. In most countries, when the army is defeated, the war is over. In the United States, when the army is defeated, the real war begins. Most people quote the famous, though likely apocryphal line from Japanese Admiral Yamamoto, "You cannot invade the mainland United States. There would be a rifle behind every blade of grass." Whether he said it or not, in 2025, the math behind that statement is more terrifying than ever. As of late 2025, there are an estimated 500 million firearms in civilian hands in the United States. To put that in perspective, that is roughly 1.5 guns for every single man, woman, and child in the country. About 43% of American households personally own at least one firearm. This isn't just a hobby, it is a massive decentralized arsenal that makes the Taliban or the Viet Cong look like a school play. If you are an occupying force, you aren't just looking for soldiers in uniforms. You are looking at every window, every rooftop, and every passing car. In a country where nearly 100 million people own weapons, many of them trained in high-level marksmanship, hunting, or former military service, the concept of pacification becomes a mathematical impossibility. Modern warfare has shown us that a small group of determined insurgents can tie down a world-class military for decades. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. military, the most advanced on Earth, struggled against an enemy with limited resources. Now, flip the script. You are the occupier, and your enemy has 500 million guns, endless ammunition, and a culture that is fundamentally built on the idea of resisting central authority. You wouldn't just be fighting rednecks in the woods. You would be fighting urban snipers in the skyscrapers of Chicago, saboteurs in the Silicon Labs of Austin, and highly organized militias in the Appalachian Mountains. Every supply truck you send out, every patrol you authorize, and every officer you house would be a target. To successfully hold the U.S., you would need an occupation force of roughly 1 soldier for every 20 citizens. That's a requirement of 17 million occupation troops. No coalition of nations on Earth has the manpower or the money to sustain that for a week, let alone a decade.
Most nations can be defeated by a blockade. If you cut off Japan's oil, they collapse. If you cut off the UK's food imports, they starve. If you cut off Germany's natural gas, their industry dies. But the United States is one of the very few nations on Earth that is truly autarkic. It can survive and thrive while being completely cut off from the rest of the world. In 2024 and 2025, the U.S. reached record-breaking energy production levels. It is currently the world's leading producer of crude oil and natural gas. While the rest of the world is fighting over pipelines in the Middle East or Central Asia, the U.S. is sitting on the Permian Basin and the Marcellus Shale. If you invade, you can't turn off the lights. The U.S. has enough coal, oil, gas, and nuclear power to keep its factories running and its homes heated indefinitely, without importing a single drop of foreign energy. Your blockade would hurt your own economy more than it would hurt the American interior. But energy is only half the battle. You also have to deal with the great American breadbasket. The U.S. is a net exporter of calories. It produces so much corn, soy, wheat, and beef that it literally pays its farmers not to grow more. While your invading army is struggling to move canned rations across the ocean, the American population is sitting on the most fertile soil on the planet. The U.S. also has the Jones Act, a century-old law that mandates all domestic maritime trade be conducted by U.S.-built, owned, and crewed ships. This has created a robust internal logistics network that is entirely independent of foreign influence. From the 25,000 miles of navigable inland waterways to the massive strategic highway network, StrawNet, the U.S. can move food and fuel from the center of the country to any front line with unparalleled efficiency. You can't starve America out, and you can't freeze them out. You are trying to invade a fortress that has its own farm, its own well, and its own power plant inside the walls. If you look at a map of the U.S., you see a grid of beautiful interstates. You see the world's largest rail network. To an invader, this looks like a highway to victory. To a strategist, it is a logistical black hole. The U.S. infrastructure was designed during the Cold War with one goal in mind: resilience. The interstate highway system was literally built to allow for the rapid movement of military assets across the continent. But that same infrastructure is a nightmare to occupy. If an enemy advances, the U.S. doesn't even need to fight a traditional battle. They just need to blow up the bridges. There are over 600,000 bridges in the U.S. The Mississippi River alone has dozens of critical crossings. If those bridges go down, the U.S. is effectively split into 2 or 3 islands. Your army in California is now 2,000 miles away from your army in Virginia, with no way to move heavy equipment between them. The U.S. rail system is the most efficient freight network on Earth, but it is incredibly easy to sabotage. A single person with a few pounds of explosives can take out a rail line and paralyze your logistics for weeks. You would be forced to guard every mile of track, every tunnel, and every overpass. This would bleed your manpower dry. You would be trying to move a 21st century army across a 19th century wasteland. Your tanks would run out of fuel because the pipelines were blown. Your soldiers would run out of food because the trains were derailed. You would be trapped in a vast, empty space where every road leads to a dead end and every bridge is a trap. In the 21st century, an invasion doesn't just happen on land, sea, or air. It happens in the electromagnetic spectrum. You might think that because the U.S. is so technologically dependent, it is vulnerable. You think you can just hack the grid and watch the country collapse. But the U.S. is not just a target in cyberspace, it is the architect of the domain. The United States controls the root servers of the Internet. It owns the satellite constellations, GPS, Starlink, and military comms that every modern army relies on. If you invade, you aren't just fighting a country, you are fighting the platform that your own technology is built upon. The U.S. has the capability to darken your own satellite navigation, scramble your communications, and turn your high-tech drones into expensive paperweights. While you are busy trying to secure a beachhead in California, the U.S. Cyber Command is busy dismantling your home country's infrastructure. Your power plants, your banking systems, and your water treatment facilities would be hit by a digital tsunami of a scale you've never imagined. In a modern invasion of the U.S., the front line is everywhere. You would be trying to fight a war in Missouri while your own capital city back home is plunging into the dark ages. The U.S. is the only nation with the depth of talent, from Silicon Valley to the NSA, to conduct a multi-front cyber war that would make an occupation economically and socially impossible for the invader. Finally, we have to talk about the most invisible yet most powerful fortification of all, the American mindset. In many countries, there is a cultural history of being conquered. There is a memory of foreign occupation, of changing borders, and of bowing to a new master. But the United States has no such memory. Since 1812, no foreign power has successfully held a single inch of the American mainland. This creates a psychological fortress. Americans are raised on the myth of their own invincibility. From Hollywood movies to history books, the national narrative is one of rebellion and ultimate victory. If you invade, you aren't just fighting a people, you are fighting an ideal. Americans are notoriously difficult to govern, even for their own government. They are individualistic, stubborn, and deeply suspicious of authority. Now, imagine trying to govern them as a foreign authority. You would be met with a level of non-compliance and active resistance that would break your soldiers' spirits in weeks. The U.S. is also a melting pot. You aren't just fighting one ethnicity or one group. You are fighting a population that includes veterans from every war of the last 50 years, engineers from every corner of the globe, and a civilian population that believes their God-given rights are worth more than their lives. There is no center of gravity to hit. There is no single leader you can capture to make the country surrender. The U.S. is a decentralized 330 million-headed hydra. You cut off one head and 10 more, armed with AR-15s and IEDs, grow back in its place.
So why hasn't anyone invaded the United States? It's not because of peace. It's not because everyone likes the U.S. It's because an invasion is a mathematical suicide. You can have the biggest army in the world. You can have the most drones, the most tanks, and the most soldiers, but you cannot change the size of the Atlantic Ocean. You cannot flatten the Rocky Mountains. You cannot disarm 100 million angry homeowners. And you cannot feed an army on a continent that is actively trying to swallow you whole. Invading America is the ultimate zero-sum game. To win, you would have to destroy the very things you are trying to capture. You would have to level the cities, burn the farms, and kill a significant portion of the population. By the time you won, you would be the master of a graveyard, and your own country would be bankrupt and broken from the effort. The U.S. military budget is astronomical, yes. The carriers and the jets are a formidable wall, but they are just the outer fence. The true power of the American fortress lies in the soil, the mountains, the calories, and the 500 million rifles hiding behind every blade of grass. The world changes. Empires rise and fall, but geography is eternal. And as long as the United States sits between two oceans, behind two mountain ranges, on the most fertile soil on Earth, it will remain the world's only impregnable island continent. So, if you're a supreme commander planning your next global conquest, take a look at the map of North America. Then, take a look at your bank account. And finally, take a look at your exit strategy. because if you cross those moats, you aren't coming back. If you learned something today about the invisible walls of the American fortress, hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, do you think technology will eventually make these geographic barriers irrelevant, or is nature the ultimate winner? Subscribe for more deep dives into the physics of power and the reality of global conflict. And if you want to see why the other side of the world is just as difficult to handle, watch our video on the death of the Russian hinterland. See you in the next one.